Okay, welcome to the webinar, The Role of Business in the Transition Towards a Sustainable World. My name is Teresa Fogelberg, and I have the honor to facilitate the dialogue and the discussion of today's webinar. The goal of this webinar is to have a information sharing and a dialogue on indeed what the role of business should be in the transition towards a sustainable world. We will be exploring the relationships between business, ethics, leaderships, and of course the role that the Earth Charter has played so far and can play in the future to advance the transition of business, to help business give a push towards a sustainable world. Today, we live in a moment, you could say in between hope and fear. There are some good signals on the global arena today that we are starting to get increasing global consensus on combating climate change, that there is new optimism on multilateralism and a few other things. And at the same time, we still are in the middle of the COVID crisis, increasing climate crisis, and we are also seeing a crisis of distrust in what you could call the social contract between different actors of society, citizens, governments, and business. If we look, for instance, at the 2021 Edelman Trust Barometer, we see that the distrust from citizens in most countries of the world, over 100 countries, in government and business have never been as low as it is today. But on the other hand, what we have seen over the past 12 months is that due to the COVID crisis, there is an increasing expectation from business leaders, from CEOs, to help to be part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. So, and what we also see is new agreements with a very important role for business, multilateral agreements, regulations that would on the one hand combat business from doing harm against society and climate, but also advance business playing a positive role. And even, for instance, in Europe, over the last 10 days, we have seen 3, 4, 5 new regulatory initiatives to increase accountability and increase responsibility of business in the field of human rights, but also in disclosure on many topics, including ethics and including on business organizing their business around strategic goals that have to do with environment, social impact, as well as good governance. So there are a lot of initiatives out there, but are those enough? And can business turn its role into a more positive one, from avoiding harm to doing good? And to what extent is business led by ethical I was just mentioning regulation, but what are the kind of ethical guidelines, the ethical inspirations that are out there for business, apart from their own initiatives between themselves, but also kind of bottom-up initiatives. And that's where, of course, Earth Charter is a very important platform and a very important, you could say, ethical guidance. So that's what we are going to discuss. And we are here with 3 very eminent speakers that I will introduce to you in a minute. But I first would like to mention a few kind of household rules for the coming hours. I think the first one is that we will keep this webinar to 1 hour, maybe 5 minutes over time, so that it's not too long and that we can keep everyone, all the listeners also sharp and focused. We also would like to make it interactive, and that means that the speakers will not give long presentations, but will kind of contribute to discussions, and we will have time for questions and comments from listeners. And there will be a certain time, moments allocated for that. This webinar will also be recorded on YouTube. So for anyone who would like to listen again, and anyone who is interested to share this with others, you can go to the website of Earth Charter, which is the organization, of course, that hosts this webinar. And by the way, if you are more interested, if you are really keenly interested in the relationship between sustainable development, ethics, Earth Charter, and the role of business, the Earth Charter does offer a specific course that is starting very soon, in early June, on sustainable leadership and the role of business. This is an 8-week online course that you can follow, and you can find information on the website of Earth Charter. Okay, so those were the household rules. Now, who will we be listening to? The speakers of today's webinar are the first speaker is Emma Verheijke. She's a partner, sustainability and impact services at Grant Thornton, and she supports businesses, investors, governments, and nonprofits on their sustainability strategy and reporting, etc. And with a focus on a transition to a more sustainable economy. And she's, of course, a big fan of Earth Charter. Then we have Volkert Engelsman, who already in 1990 founded Eosta, which is a Dutch company, which is the largest company in Europe to import, pack, and distribute organically grown fresh products, and serves natural food stores in most parts of the world. They also have very innovative projects like track and trace system of the social and environmental impact of the products, true cost and true pricing, as well as a project in the field of organic agriculture. Very interesting to have Volkert Engelsman with us. And the third speaker is Chris Beehner, who is a professor in Florida at the Seminole State College, and he teaches courses in sustainable business and sustainability management. And Professor Beehner is also the one who leads the online course that I was just referring to, Business and Ethical Leadership for Sustainability. Before becoming a professor, he had many other positions, including working in the supply chain management in, amongst others, the renewable energy industry. So those were the three speakers of today. And I would like to start with a question, and I would like to get a really brief and crisp answer from the three speakers on why sustainability is really important from the business world perspective. And I would like to ask Emma to kick off. Why is sustainability so relevant for business?
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. So I think sustainability for a long time has been somewhat of a project on the side for many businesses. And we saw that basically the sustainability reporting started about 30 years ago, but also in the last 30 years, the most emissions have been put into the atmosphere since ever before. So we can conclude that companies doing more sustainability reporting hasn't really led to them actually doing better and improving their impact on people and planet. But I think in the last year or so, that is really shifting. And we're now seeing that businesses are realizing that when you talk about sustainability, it's not only about their impact on people and planet, which is really important, but they're also seeing more and more that the changing climate, the changing context, the changing sentiments in society, including the regulations that you're mentioning, Teresa, are really starting to impact businesses as well. So from a risk perspective, from an opportunity side of things, it's really just starting to tap into how do businesses include that in their strategy, in their governance, in their transparency, and in their reporting. And the extent to which they do that is increasingly affecting the value of companies, and also the way, the extent to which they are future-proof and they still have a license to operate in the future. So I think that's a really important aspect. But let's also not forget that there's a crucial role for businesses to really improve that impact, because there's really negative impact on the world that needs changing. But there's also a huge potential in the capital and efforts that businesses can allocate to good causes.
So could you say very sharply, without sustainability, a company will not survive?
I'm convinced that that's the case, yes. And I think at the moment we're at a tipping point. So not everyone's realizing that yet, but we are seeing more and more that also climate-related risks are starting to emerge and starting to have financial impact for companies.
So let's ask Volkert if you agree with that, because you lead a very important company. Would you agree with Emma that without sustainability, a business would be out of business or will be out of business? Could you mute your...
Yep. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Teresa, for the question. And I couldn't agree more with Emma that we live in life-threatening circumstances, people and planet-wise. We are blasting through the planetary boundaries and falling through our social foundations, and desperately need an economy that redefines profit in such a sense that we include the costs and benefits of people and planet in our profit definition. We still live in a market where the polluter gets away with a competitive advantage. And but as Emma brilliantly summarized, things are changing, not only on a regulatory level, but also on a risk management level. Central banks are performing climate stress tests, biodiversity stress tests, health stress tests, and sustainability is increasingly being implemented in the RAROCs, in our risk-adjusted return on capital. So those who stay in the dirty old normal will risk no longer getting access to markets or capital. And those who are part of the new normal or the journey towards the new normal will have a license to operate. And this requires dream, dance, deliver. If we want to deliver change, if we want to deliver a meaningful footprint on this planet, if we want to deliver a contribution to closing the wealth gap, then we need to dance. We need coalitions of the willing. We need to co-create and stop knocking on doors that won't open, because they will also exist. Those who want to stay in the old normal, and because they're addicted to the perverse incentives that parasite on people and planet. So we need to keep knocking on those doors that do open and create co-creations of the willing, provided by platforms such as Earth Charter. Yep. And that all assumes that we share a common dream, which is the purpose of us getting together anyway.
Good. And I think you already went into in answering my second question. So keep some of what you were, hold on to some of what you were starting to say. But in the meantime, I would like, after having heard the strategic advisor, the CEO, I would like to hear the professor. Do you agree with this analysis, or do you think it's too rosy-eyed?
I agree with both of our panelists. It's essential for business to become sustainable at this point. When I open up my first class to teach sustainable business, or when I address an audience, a chamber of commerce, a group of business people, the icebreaker I initiate to get their attention is I tell them, I don't care if you believe in climate change or not. I don't care if you care about the planet or not. Your customers do, and your competition knows that, and they are responding. So as a business today, in the 21st century, you really have two choices. You can respond to your customers' demand and operate more sustainably and responsibly, and reap the benefits, the additional profits you'll make by people coming to your business, or you can begin preparing your resume and start looking for a job, because you won't, CEO or line level supervisor, you won't have a job if you're not embracing that. And and again, as Emma mentioned, in the past year, there's been a sea of change among businesses that they're starting to say, okay, I need to do something, but I can't afford to. And so then it goes back to the capitalist incentive of profitability. Well, sustainability doesn't cost. We're reading, there's always a shortage of some resource. Today it's lumber. It makes sense to use less of that. You'll make more profit if you find a way to use less of a resource. And then if you tell your customers, I'm trying to be sustainable, look what I've done, again, you'll get the rewards of increased revenue and increased profit, which will keep your business operating.
Okay, so it makes a lot of business sense, and I think that's really good to hear. But what can business do? Because obviously first of all, I think I've heard some time ago, I've read some time ago that there are about 600,000 M&Es, multinational enterprises out there. 90% of the largest group of enterprises have a sustainability strategy. They measure it, they report on it, they follow the rules. But of the 800,000, there's still a lot out there that don't do anything. And in the meantime, the agreements under the Sustainable Development Goals, they have not been very sharp in carving out a role for business, in the sense that business are really accountable for it. So in a certain sense, in a certain way, especially multinational enterprises are rather floating. So what can business really do to change the course? And those that are pioneers or front runners, what can they do to advance sustainability? And what is the role of leadership in there? And we'll talk about ethics later, but you could already start to address it. But I also would like to hear more specifically about Earth Charter, but we can do that at a later stage. So maybe I would start with Volkert first now, Volkert Engelsman.
Yep, present. Sorry, Teresa, your question is, what can business do?
Exactly. What can business do itself within its own company, but also to kind of advance and move the whole business movement, their own sector, but the whole business coalition as a whole?
Yeah, all right. No, thank you for asking.
Yeah, so that it doesn't remain within the same old niche of those that are already engaged. So what can business do?
Well, first of all, I don't think it does. It doesn't stay in the same group. Sustainability, as Chris already summarized brilliantly, is breaking out of its green bubble. It's descending into the DNA of business at large. And yes, there are speed differences. So you have the front runners, the early adopters, the first movers, etc. And you will always have that, but it's a shifting thing. So I think, first of all, we need to accept the idea that there will always be front runners, because change has never come from a following majority. And some of these big corporates are just too big to move. They're oil tankers. So you need the smaller enterprises to set the tone so others can then scale up. Secondly, so that's a leadership principle, I think. Secondly, it all starts with transparency and disclosure, as Emma already mentioned. So it's a journey. It's not from A to B. It's not sort of being trying to be converted from 0 to 100, but it's a gradual thing. Thirdly, I think the 4 M's help here. We need to measure impact, manage it, market it, and monetize it. And on all 4 levels, you can you can apply policies that can be scaled up. So when it comes to measuring, I think you guys, Teresa, have done a fantastic job with the Global Reporting Initiative. There are other taxonomy instruments to measure impact, SDGs included. That's important that we harmonize that. So we provide public agents with a framework that defines what is sustainable and what not. And then we need to set achievable targets and focus on the 2080 rule, whereby we focus on the 20% of the indicators that define 80% of the impact. And then we need to move to the third M, which is related to marketing the impact. Chris has already mentioned that it doesn't necessarily need to be more expensive, but sometimes it is. If our farmers build soil fertility at the expense of productivity per hectare, maybe they lose 10% or so, but they gain long-term productivity by contributing to ecosystem services, biodiversity, mitigation of climate change, soil fertility, etc. Well, that costs money. And they need to be rewarded, because how can they become green if their figures are red? So we need to be creative as a business community, how to reward those who contribute to people and planet, and provide them with financial incentives. But obviously also the public world has to play a role there to provide fiscal instruments that penalize the polluter and support the one who contributes to sustainability. And precisely that is happening right now on a national and transnational level, for instance, in an EU context. And finally, Teresa, I think monetization is key. So the Capitals Coalition, but also UN think tanks are exploring how to include people and planet related costs and benefits in a new profit and loss accounting and into a new balance sheet thinking. And whilst that may not be visible in the street yet, I think that, behind the screens, a lot is happening, and we need pilots such as the pilot we carried out with UN think tanks and many others, retailers, banks included, to provide best practices and evidence that it is possible.
Okay, thank you. Then I would like to ask Professor Chris Beehner, what, and please unmute yourself, what can the role of business be in this transition towards sustainability? Once they are, convinced they have to do it, what can they do?
Well, I think there's three areas that business can have an impact on sustainability. The first one is capital. If you look at the Oxfam has done a wonderful job at looking at the various aspects of wealth. And every year they publish the 100 largest economies or economic institutions. And if you look at that list today, approximately 60 of the world's largest economic institutions are multinational corporations. You've got the revenue of the Netherlands government last year was $308 billion. Amazon's revenue was 20% higher than that. If you don't accept looking at revenue, if you look at wealth, the wealth of Saudi Arabia as a nation is $1.5 trillion. And if you look at the market cap of Amazon, it's $1.7 trillion.
And so what can, if I may ask, what can capital do then? You said capital is important. What can it do to transform towards sustainability?
Well, this will require investments. As Volkert mentioned, sometimes there will be a cost because you have to take an action that is long-term, and there will be investments required that there will be the capitalist rewards of, if I'm the one who makes this investment, people will look to me as the trendsetter because I've taken that first step, and I can then reap the license to operate, so to speak. The other two areas I wanted to quickly touch on of the role of business is obviously the small and medium enterprises don't have the billions and trillions of dollars, but what they have is the agility and flexibility I worked for a multinational, and we would open and close operations and make changes, and we could do them in maybe 90 to 120 days. My father was a small contractor, small enterprise owner growing up. And when he saw something changing that he had to respond to, he did it the next day because he had to, because if he didn't respond, he would fail and we would not eat. So the second thing that I think where the SMEs come in is the agility and flexibility to see a problem and say, I can do something right now and I can respond. And then the third area that business, both small and large, can contribute is with innovation. We can't do things, Albert Einstein famously said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We can't do things the same way. We have to, but we don't, in some areas, we don't know what to do yet. And whether it be the small entrepreneur in Sudan, or whether it be the largest corporations in the world, they have the ability to innovate and say, I see a problem and I think I can fix it and I can try. And again, be the trendsetter that lead, follow, or step out of the way. People will look and say, this is a leader and this is an innovation, and they will flatter you by copying it and following you.
Okay, I think that's very clear. And then Emma, you were the first in the first round, and now you are the last. Having listened to the two previous speakers about what business can and must do, what would you like to add?
Yeah, so my view is that we really need to move from proving, from reporting to improving, and that's going to be a challenge. And, I think there's a lot of, everyone knows that we need to move. No one's really against being sustainable, but I think there's really a knowledge gap on how to do that. And that's really where we should place our efforts. And what we see happening a lot is that companies starting with sustainability strategy, sustainability reporting, but the focus is on the wrong things. So we often, we say, yeah, they're reporting the recyclable coffee cups, but not the huge emissions in the supply chain. So they're not focusing on the material themes. And that's the shift that we need to make. So there's a risk of greenwashing also, and the regulation is going to help in that regard. But I think we also really need those best practices that Volkert also mentioned. So we need to show what works, what doesn't. Also need to dare to experiment in that space. And we really need to look beyond the boundaries of our organizations. So not just our own impact, but what is the impact that we have as a sector, and how does that relate to the targets that we have from the Paris Agreement? So what do we really need to do together to meet, to stay behind that 2 degrees global warming and to reach net zero in 2050? Yeah. Because we really need to collaborate on that. And to your question, Teresa, so what does that mean for leadership? I think that requires a different form of leadership, and it requires brave leaders, because you need to make different choices following Chris's statement on Einstein that we have done in the past. So we need new collaborations that are scary, because we need to, drop our competitional spirit, and we need to really look at the long-term view, except from, so not just look at short-term value for our shareholders. And that requires, I think, leaders that really dare to set the course and also stay the path, even though, there may be criticism and things may go wrong, etc.
Yeah, I thank you very much for those three very diverse, but I think very important answers. Maybe Emma, to get back to your last point, or actually I have two questions to you. When you said we have to look at materiality, I think the first set of questions, the first question on the answer, what does it mean for business? We talked about materiality in the sense of the importance for the bottom line, for the financial survival of a company. It has to deal with sustainability. You talked about the other side of materiality. Nowadays, we talk about double materiality, the materiality for society, what business can mean for society. And I think we have now come to an agreement that double materiality, both sides are relevant. But when you said that leaders have to be brave, I want to do a quick second round on this question on leadership. And you started it. We read in the papers last week that the city of New York or the state of New York is now suing 3 or 4 oil companies because they are claiming a role in sustainability. They are saying that their product is the best while they come from gas and oil sector. And New York is saying, well, you are polluting our citizens, our consumers. You are misleading under the law of consumer protection. You are abusing our consumers. And we also see that in the negotiations on business and human rights that are taking place in Geneva under the umbrella of the UN Commission on Human Rights, and also the new regulation in Europe that is coming on business and human rights and environment impact, they are talking about civil liability of CEOs, meaning that CEOs, first, those that promise things and that are misleading, they can be, they can be brought to court, but also companies that are not disclosing any, bad environmental impact can also be brought to court. They can be civilly liable. So not as a company, but as an individual that is leading a company. So what is your reaction to that? Would that not be risking that leaders are becoming too shy? And maybe Volkert and Chris can also answer to that question. How can we make, and I think Earth Charter starts to peep around the corner here, the role of Earth Charter. How can we not discourage CEOs? When you said we need brave leaders. I can imagine that some of them are scared because of all these, liability risks and angry citizens.
Yeah.
Emma, and then Chris, and then Volkert on this question on leadership.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I think that's a really important point that you're raising there. And it's really about striking a balance that you can foster and empower that bravery in leaders. And I think it's really important to create an environment where you can also fail as long as you are sincere about the course that you are setting and about also transparency about, some things fail, but this is where we're going. This is what our commitments are. And this is what we are doing to get there. I think, with regard to leadership, it's not just about the CEO. It's also about the boards of directors and the board of trustees and the advisory board and the shareholders and everyone else in that firm that, in my view, shares an accountability of what that company does and about the course that is set. And the CEO is, of course, an important person, but it's not the only one that's behind the steering wheel, to put it that way.
Okay, Chris, how can we empower sustainability, or how can we empower corporate leaders, CEOs and board members? Would your course help in that? And would Earth Charter help them to become empowered and not to be afraid to be courageous?
We need different types of leaders. What we've had up till now has gotten us in the circumstance that we're all upset about. The definition of leadership, the academic definition, is the the process of influencing a group of people to accomplish a goal. So it's a process. I took a charter course and I'm now a leader, but it's a process that I go through. Problem that what's gotten us in this situation is leaders are very short term. Profit this fiscal quarter, this year. We're very or siloed in that I'm only worried about my department and my department making a profit and my company making a profit. And what the leadership that's required is more of a systems thinking, system leadership where I have no control over my supplier, but I have to influence my supplier because his or her behavior is not good for the environment. I have to influence my customer to behave differently. I have to influence my competition. I have to influence my regulators. And that takes a leader who doesn't say, look at the calendar and say, I'm in a 3-month period and that's all I can think about. But a leader that says, I have children and grandchildren, and so do my neighbors, and I want them to have the lifestyle or better than mine. And the only way I can do that is to get out of the box that I'm in and influence the whole system and not just my little box that I'm in.
Yeah. Volkert, you are CEO of a company that is in a niche. You are, so to speak, you could say you are, to a large extent, you are in the sustainability niche of production. What is your take on leadership and courage and sustainability?
Thank you, Teresa. I'm not sure if organic can still be considered a niche with 15%. But okay.
Sorry.
And I just had to make that point. Secondly,
you're right. Yeah.
I agree with Chris that leadership is a diverse thing. We need different types of leadership in one orchestra called the Transition Orchestra. And I see Ama van Danzig, she's a leader. And I see Mirjam, she's a leader in her field. And I'm sure all of us are leaders in our field. And in that orchestra, you certainly also need activists and blokes who start suing oil companies or the Dutch government for that matter. We're a bit late in Europe, but the Americans started suing each other much earlier than we discovered that. But we're also discovering, we're catching up. And I totally believe in that concept. Not as the only concept, but an important concept in the transition orchestra. So I think if you zoom out a little bit, Teresa, it's about self-leadership, discovering who you are and defining where your purpose is. In the end, it's all about karma. You don't want, because if you don't embrace this concept of karma, we will be very uneconomic. It will be very inefficient. What we do to each other or to the planet is what we ultimately do to ourselves, and not only to ourselves, but also to the next generation and probably the next incarnation, if you include reincarnation as well. Now, if you wonder where the hell Engelsman is going, I don't know. But I believe this working hypothesis of karma and reincarnation is a powerful tool to understand self-leadership, this concept of self-leadership better. And I think, as Chris brilliantly said, we're not going to solve the thinking, the problem with the thinking that created the problems in the first place. So let's be courageous. To close the loop to your question, how brave need leaders to be? Let's close the loop by saying, let's be courageous, spiritually courageous as well. And not only guide ourselves on life cycle assessment, but also when it comes to self-leadership and going this more intimate journey, and be transparent about that as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that.
Teresa, can I just quickly respond to that?
Very briefly, because I want to give the floor now to anyone from the audience who would like to ask a question. So sure. Very briefly, Emma.
Yeah, no, just wanting to add that I think it's as an example of making brave choices that may require as a leader that, you may collaborate with a partner for something or an assignment that you do for a client that leads to less profit for your company, but a better impact on the world. And I think that's really the choices that it's going to come down to. And you probably need that personal leadership that Volkert is referring to be able to make those choices, which are really important.
Better for your karma anyway.
Good point. Okay, now anyone, I have not seen any chat questions or comments, but I would like to invite for a few minutes people who are listening in. If you have a question or if you have an advice or if you have a comment, please be very, very brief. Just say your name and then and go ahead. And I would like to invite 3 people, and then we will continue with the next very important question. What will be the role and what can be the role and what is the role of the Earth Charter in all of this? So Ama, I would like to ask you to, Ama van Danzig, I think we can all see you, like to say something.
Yeah, first, thank you very much for this, for bringing us all together around this very important topic. I have a lot of questions, but I'll pick one for now.
Great.
Yeah.
Is that question
So
to anybody? Do you address that question to anybody specifically from the speakers?
Well, it's based on something Chris said earlier that makes me wonder, and maybe it's a good bridge to the next section about what is ethical. Chris was talking about something that always baffles me, which is the amount of wealth that we have created on this planet and the incredible imbalance of this. So you have corporations that are richer than nations, and you were using, fathomable examples between European countries, for instance, Saudi Arabia and big corporations. But in this this extreme imbalance, what is ethical? What is ethical in this? You know, we live in a world where people have trillion, whatever. I don't know what that even means, trillion. And we have people who are still hungry on this same planet. And we're talking about all of this in the context of ethics and the Earth Charter. What is ethical if we're still thinking about growth? If we're still thinking, I mean, this is unhealthy growth, right? So what is ethical? And do we maybe have to look at our concept of growth at the moment? They don't sound healthy to me. So maybe the question is to Chris, to maybe you have to solve this question.
Yeah. I'm going to ask 3 people to speak, if they are 3 people. I haven't seen any other hands. And then the speakers to react. And maybe we can kind of weave Ama's question into the question on the role of Earth Charter. But I would like to see any other hands with burning questions or comments that can be taken up by the speakers. Would anybody like to say something at this stage? If not, I don't see...
Teresa, I think Michael raised his hand.
Michael, I don't see a Michael.
Right here.
Michael Brecken.
Michael Brecken. Hello, Michael. Sorry, I overlooked you.
No problem. How are you?
Fine. Please.
Great. Welcome, everybody. The question I have for the panel, and it could be anybody who is participating today, is that, it's great to talk in global terms about what's best for individual companies and becoming more sustainable. It's another thing to actually have metrics that can be accessed by a broad-based group of employees and among the leadership team to actually quantify, what's most important, let's say using the pillars of the Earth Charter, and how you can measure it on an ongoing basis. So you can basically receive an adaptation for the entire organization to move in the right direction. But it's got to be simple, it's got to be accessible, and it has to be something that can be promoted on an ongoing basis, as opposed to a 400-page book on it. What does the panel recommend in a way something that's really, vital, succinct, and something where the entire organization can buy into it?
Great. Okay. See, I don't see, maybe Miriam, you can help me if you see a third person. If not, then I would like to go to a next round, and with an eye on the clock, what I would like to suggest is that we indeed address the question on how Earth Charter can be used, and that we keep those 2 questions in mind. The question from about the wealth gap, how extreme wealth and people going hungry can still go hand in hand, and how does it relate to the concept of ethics and the concept of growth? And the second question is about how can we give more of an ownership to companies, that it's not only something very abstract on paper, but that the employees also have a co-ownership of where the company should go and how we are getting there, and how that can be measured in a kind of collective way. So I would like to ask Emma to be the first one to speak on the role of Earth Charter, and then also if you feel you could answer any of these 2 questions. I actually would like to also answer to the question of Michael Brecken when we get to that. Yeah, please go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's really a need for 2 things. First is awareness around this topic. Exactly as we're doing here, we need to really have more conversations about what works, what doesn't, why it's important, and how you can reach those sustainability goals. And I think Earth Charter can play a really important role in that respect. And also education, so just training and empowering those leaders that we need to make the changes.
Yeah.
Training others.
May I interrupt you? When you say awareness and education, you talk and you give strategic advice to a lot of companies. Do you use the Earth Charter in your dialogue with those companies?
We mention it, but we don't use it enough. So for me, this is also really good to have it back and higher on the agenda. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe to briefly, sorry, Teresa.
Go ahead. I interrupted you with my question. Please go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So Amma, so maybe briefly to your question, and I totally agree that there is, I think a lot of improvements to be made in terms of what is ethical business also. And I think also this COVID year has really shown some examples of what is and what isn't ethical. You know, also about companies tapping into government structures, government funding, grants, whereas, you know, in previous years they've had huge profits, or in other countries they've had huge profits. And I think, as a society, we're really starting to ask questions about that as well. And I think also with regard to an end to growth, that's really important. And touching back on the brave leadership, that's also a question that leaders should be asking themselves. You know, does my company have license to operate in the future? That's also regarding to some industries that are really creating negative impact on the environment. But also, do I need to pursue this rapid growth path, and at what cost? So yeah, I think that's important, and I think we are seeing changes, but we need to be more aware as society also to flag where we think businesses are not behaving ethically, and we should call them to account. That's also what Volkert was saying before, you know, sue companies. That would be one way of doing it. But also just, placing this emphasis on that all the time. And with regard to measurement, I think that's really going to help also. So if we start to become better as companies to measure more structurally, more structured, and communicate about impact in a more transparent way, that's also going to help us as a society flag when companies are not behaving ethically. But I don't think that's going to be one standard or one framework, Michael, to your question, that will work in that respect, because there is already a huge amount of frameworks and methods and indicators out there. So in my view, and what we see from our clients also, what really helps to also get the commitment throughout the company is set clear targets and focus on those material outcomes. So really pick, you know, not all SDGs, but pick a couple of focused sustainable development goals that your company works on, and make those really concrete. So it also becomes clear for people, you know, for all your employees, where you are going, what the commitments are, how you will reach those goals, and how they can contribute, because then it becomes really, something that everyone can work on jointly.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I would like to ask Chris Beehner, Earth Charter in all of this.
I think I can answer your question as well as Amma's with a story. 2 years ago, I was at the Earth Charter Conference on Education for Sustainable Development, and I was presenting about how I teach business people to be sustainable. And when I was done, I was so proud of myself, how I talked about saving the planet and, you know, the environment. And someone came up to me and said, "That's great, but there's 16 principles and 4 pillars in the Earth Charter. What are you doing about poverty? What are you doing about educating women?" And this person started rattling off all these principles, and I'm like, I'm embarrassed. I think that's the problem. Is in business, we're focused on saving the planet, and what we don't realize, I forget which famous ecologist said this, but the planet does not need saving. It's been here for billions of years, and it will be here long after we're gone. We're talking about saving humanity, and we have to save the planet so that we can exist. And I think too often in business, we focus on, okay, we can recycle and we can cut resources and we can be green, while less than 100 of the wealthiest people on the planet control as much wealth as the bottom 50% of the planet. That's another Oxfam statistic. I don't remember the number, but it's less than 100 people. So there's this huge disparity, and we're focused on the trees and the water and the air, and we're forgetting the people that need those. And so I think you're seeing, again, with a sea of change, we're starting to see, if nothing else, out of fear. One of the recent World Economic Forums in Davos, the actual topic was the income disparity, because business quietly recognizes that in history, when we've had such immense gaps in wealth, we've had events like revolutions and coups, and we certainly don't want that. And so I think business is starting to recognize that we need to understand the triple bottom line of sustainability is profits, planet, but most importantly, people. And I think we're starting to see that change, but that's what the message. So to tie that into the Earth Charter quickly, what can the Earth Charter do? What's the future of the Earth Charter? Everyone knows the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Everyone in business knows the UN Global Compact. It's like the elephant in the room, and we can't help but see it. And forgive me for this analogy, but the Earth Charter in some circles is like the mouse that's coming in the room. And it's a very important mouse, because the Sustainable Development Goals are meaningless if we don't have a mechanism to achieve it. And I refer to the Earth Charter as the spirit, the spirituality of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because that's how we do it. We know what we need to do. The Earth Charter gives us the spirit to actually do it. So we all need to help the Earth Charter expand that footprint and recognition in the business community, so that it's no longer, and forgive me for that analogy, but so that it's no longer the mouse, that if it's the mouse, it's the loudest yelling mouse in that room, and everyone sees it and says, I want to pay attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. We now come to Volkert, and in the meantime, I have seen quite a few comments from the chat box, and you know, we already have the two outstanding questions. We also got a question about the COVID crisis, and to what extent that would distract companies from investing or focusing on sustainability if they also have financial constraints through the COVID crisis. So maybe you can say something about that. And also the question about Faber, who was, you know, thrown out had to withdraw from Danone because of the activist shareholders that kind of ganged up against him because he was too, again, I think this is a comment which relates to an earlier part of our discussion, but I just want to say that somebody mentioned this in the chat box. He was a courageous leader, and he was decapitated because of you know, the importance of short-term capitalism. But I just want to mention that these comments came from the chat box, as did other comments. I think very valid comments about brave leadership, and also some examples of companies giving, you know, also spending on society, for instance, on eco schools. I think somebody gave that example. So I think there are quite a few other good comments coming in from the chat box. So I'm giving you a very difficult task to spend 2 minutes. Just go ahead and try to say what you wanted to say, but to somehow include the questions that were raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Very good questions and very inspiring questions too. And I agree with Chris. We're almost sort of arriving at apocalyptic times where you have those who are stuck in the old normal, and including all the perverse incentives and the stranded assets. I mean, the oil companies are sitting on huge amounts of stranded assets, which
does everybody know what the stranded asset is? I don't think everybody knows. Can you say in half a minute or 10 seconds?
Well, certain banks, for instance, Rabobank, I don't want to mention names, but anyway, or Shell, are sitting on what they call stranded assets because they are sitting on oil reserves or investments in the old intensive animal husbandry and farming systems that are part of the old normal. And if they would convert to new nature-inclusive farming schemes or green energies and renewable energies, and that would go too fast, and that would undermine their sheer existence. So they have an invested interest to slow that process down. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, of course, you have a fight going on between those invested interests and those who want to speed up. And we can't look away from that fight. That ultimately also takes in within ourselves, and not just for the Emmanuel Fabers of Danone's or Paul Polmans of Unilever's, who are confronted with this old school profit definition that excludes or externalizes costs of damage to people and planet, fighting against long-term interests that do include people and planet. So yes, that will happen, and casualties, we will see casualties there in terms of people and companies. Secondly, if you talk about this new conversion to the new normal, somebody mentioned here Corona, and the World Economic Forum under leadership of Klaus Schwab has published this book, The Great Reset, which speaks about a threefold vitality. So the new part of the new normal will be post-corona normal, will be personal vitality, because we see that corona is particularly hitting those who are vulnerable and not particularly vital. The second pillar is social vitality, which Chris alluded to when he talked, and others when they talked, and Amma in the first place, when they talked about the growing income or wealth gap, which risks yellow vests, which risks Black Lives Matter type of developments, which risk growing populism of the ones who are left behind. And that with that, we risk social unrest, enormous social unrest. And the third pillar is ecological vitality. So we need resilient ecosystems that can keep viruses and pandemics under control. So we need to look beyond this little corona tsunami and look at this huge three waves: personal vitality, social inclusion, and ecological resilience. And behind those, you see crisis unfolding in slow motion, because people are not particularly getting more healthy. Social inclusion is not particularly solved, and ecosystems are not particularly getting better, with 70% of our biodiversity and ecosystems being lost. So we need to address these, and we need leadership to create the foundation stones for that new normal and implement that in a fiscal level playing field and in the market that no longer allows the polluter to get away with a competitive advantage. So what I'm trying to say is that this is completely impossible to answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Which now brings me to, I would say, to the conclusive round of this webinar. We have addressed three very important questions. The first one is, why and how is sustainability important to business? The second is, what should be done in order for business to be pushing the world to sustainable, to a transition to a more sustainable future? And last but not least, what is the role? What can the role be of Earth Charter in all of this? I will summarize. I have made some notes, That's why you have seen me scribbling at the end. But I would still like to ask each of the three of you in one sentence to give a message to the world, to give a message to each other, and on which people can reflect and say, okay, this is something, maybe in the form of a question, but the three of you are allowed to say one line each, and after that I will try to recap the very rich discussion, a very rich contribution, which I will obviously fail to do, but I will try to pick out some of the key messages. So now, who would like to go first? Emma, Volkert, or Chris? Emma, unmute yourself. There you go.
Happy to go first. Thanks, Teresa. So I consider myself a radical optimist, meaning we as businesses have huge challenges before us. We really have work to do, but I'm convinced that we can do it if we start to become more honest and more accountable about our impact and start to really act on that. Then we can really meet those climate goals.
Excellent. Then, Volkert, can I ask you in one sentence, huh?
That's impossible, but okay. No, let me try, Teresa. Let's dream, dance, and deliver.
Excellent. You talked about 4 M's, and now you have the 3 D's. I actually prefer your 3 D's.
Yeah.
Dream, dance, and deliver.
Yeah, if you want to deliver change, dance. And if you want to dance, dream. And there's also 3 F's, which are part of our leadership scheme here. Dream or fake. So if Emma says, be yourself, be sincere, it's sort of be honest about your purpose, or fake. And dance or freeze, and or deliver or F up.
Okay, Chris, can you beat that with one sentence?
I'm going to make a statement, not as a business professor or former business manager, but as a human. My advice to business leaders and non-business leaders: look inside, look in the mirror and say, what do I want my legacy to be? Look at your religious and spiritual beliefs. Every religion, love your neighbor, care for the planet. Look at the Earth Charter, look at inside at what is meaningful to me, and how can I make the world the world that it should be as a reflection of what I believe. And so you've got to look deep in your soul, and I know it sounds very philosophical, but if you don't look at yourself and where you're coming from and what you want, you can't tell anyone else to accomplish what needs to be done.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I feel very shy to speak after these 3 very wise words from the 3 speakers on this webinar, but I had promised to do it, so I will. Actually, today on the 5th of May in the Netherlands, we are celebrating our national liberation, you could say our Freedom Day. We call it Freedom Day because we were liberated at the end of the Second World War, but we are celebrating freedom from conflict, freedom from foreign domination, and autonomy at the individual and at the national level. So I think it's a very special day today. I just mentioned the 3 questions that we addressed here as a panel, and I think on the first question there was a full consensus that without sustainability, there will be no business. Sustainability is not a choice, but it's a must for business. Then we discussed what business can or must do, and here were a few things that stood out. First of all, transparency. I think Emma came back to that at the end also. Transparency, accountability. The transition to sustainability is a journey, and we heard from Chris that 3 things are needed: capital, and also diverting from perverse financial incentives. I think we also heard that from others. Innovation, but also the power and the flexibility of SMEs, that they can do, that they can make the big difference. We heard that it's not about individual businesses, it's businesses collectively as a sector or maybe at country level that have to move. Very often business association at national level, by the way, are the ones that go against positive change. But sectors sometimes do an effort, but that's very important. And we heard in the question from Michael, what can be done within companies to make it more, an ownership by the employees as well. So I think that's also a very important point. We heard about 4 ways that companies can actually move towards sustainability. The 4 M's: to measure, to manage, to market, and to monetize. And I think that is, of course, also related to the element of financial and fiscal incentives. So these were a whole range of things that can be done by individual companies, by regulators, and also by citizens as consumers. We then discussed leadership and how important leadership is as an element to make this journey. We talked about bravery and also how leaders in companies and managers in companies, and for that matter, I would say also employees, could become empowered to become courageous and to act ethically and not fear punishments or sanctions. And it was also mentioned that education and awareness of leaders is important. And by the way, let me then also remind you of the online course of Earth Charter that is starting on the 7th of June until the end of July, and which is taking place throughout these 8 weeks. And for those who want to have practical information, look at the website. But it's a very cheap, very affordable course, I would say, for less than $600. So that's the way leaders can be empowered to actually lead. But it was also mentioned that we need a system around leaderships and measures and rules that actually enable this leadership and don't make leaders be punished or fall through, for instance, shareholder capitalism. And we also need a diversity of leaders, different kinds of leaders. And the term of self-leadership was mentioned, that people have to look at themselves and understand why, what is the purpose of their existence, and what, how can they help and contribute through who they are and what they can do for their role. We also heard about, I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, that brings me to the point of ethics and how we have moved away from sustainability being instrumental activities and goals, like environmental issues that have to be dealt with, social issues that have to be solved, risks and opportunities, to a more fundamental ethical level. And it's interesting to see that that is now coming up also in regulation, but also in international forums. That we need ethics to be grounded in all of these achievements and all of these activities and aims, because otherwise we risk greenwashing. We address that as well, and we risk superficial activities. So there, Earth Charter plays an extremely important role, in spite of extra challenges like the COVID situation that was also mentioned. or even maybe more urgently of the COVID crisis, that of course is also related to other sustainability crises, and that the Earth Charter, next to the SDGs, provides a kind of a moral compass, and also maybe more, you could say, although there is a lot of content in the Earth Charter, also gives a kind of spiritual grounding to the Sustainable Development Goal. And basically, I think when people, you know, in whatever part of society, whatever constituency they live or work in, as individuals, as business leaders, as government employees, they, when having read or while reading the Earth Charter, they can ask themselves, do I really want to live in a world, or do I want my children to live in a world that is not like what Earth Charter describes? So in that sense, it can be very inspirational. So I think we are a little bit over time, but I think I have tried to capture the very rich contributions from the speakers and also from the audience. And I would like to then now close this webinar. Thank everybody, wish you success in all your endeavors, and look forward to hear maybe in a year or in a few months from now how where you are on your sustainability journey, and get back to you then. Thank you so much. Goodbye.